Welcome to The Fully Mindful, where we explore what it means to live with intention, creativity, authenticity, and connection. I'm your host, Melissa Chareau, mindfulness and breathwork facilitator, neurodivergent lawyer and coach, and fellow human navigating this wild and beautiful ride we call life. On this podcast, we dive deep with interviews featuring inspiring guests, share solo mini episodes packed with guided mindfulness practices to help you center and thrive, and mix things up with tangents and sidebars, where my friend and fellow podcaster Debbie Harrell from the New World Normal joins me for some real, random, and meaningful conversations. So if you're ready to pause, reflect, and expand, you're in the right place. Let's get fully mindful. Well, hello, everyone. This is Melissa with The Fully Mindful, and this is where we explore the depth and breadth of mindfulness in every facet of our lives and how we find our purpose or purposes in life. Today, we have the honor of hosting Dr. Emily Levy. She's an educational expert, author, and advocate for students with special educational needs or different educational needs. She is also the founder and director of EBL Coaching, a specialized tutoring program offering individualized, research-based instruction using multi-sensory techniques. She's also authored several workbooks, including Strategies for Success and the Flags and Stars series, which are used in schools nationwide. With a master's degree in special education and a doctorate in education, she has dedicated her career to advancing educational strategies and support for students with learning differences. And I'm happy to delve into her journey, her challenges, her aspirations in the field of education. So welcome, Dr. Levy.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. I love having different folks on this podcast. And this subject is near and dear to my heart. As folks know who listen to the podcast, I have ADHD and thus have experience of being a neurodivergent person in the world. However, when I was growing up, ADHD wasn't so well understood, and we've come a long way, and there's a lot more that we have to learn about it in the field of education, as well as just out there in the world, along with other neurodivergent conditions. So I'm excited to have you here. So if you could share maybe a little bit about your journey and what inspired you to pursue this career.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. Well, to date back, I actually grew up in the field of special education. My mother was the founder of a school for students with learning disabilities down in South Florida, which is where I grew up. So I spent so much of my childhood working at her school, observing kids and teachers and being trained in various methods for helping students who have different types of learning challenges. Of course, I decided initially that I wanted to carve my own path and not be in sort of the shadow of my mother, so to speak. So I went to Brown University, and then I actually pursued finance for a few years of all fields, which is totally different than education. Quickly realized it wasn't for me, even though I did learn many valuable skills from those few years within finance. But I quickly pivoted back. I recalled how gratifying, how rewarding it was to help special education students and to see what a life-changing experience it could be for them to receive the right support. So that was when I started actually tutoring on my own students who had various types of learning and attentional challenges. And then eventually, very slowly and organically, I began to grow what is now EBL Coaching, where I brought in different experts on board to provide the tutoring in all skill areas: reading, writing, math, study skills, executive functioning skills, to all different types of special education students. And of course, along the way, I also, as you mentioned, received my master's degree in special education, as well as my doctorate degree in education.
An incredible amount of experience you have there, and as well as having folks on your team to fill in any gaps. I'm not sure that you have any there, but if there are any, they can fill them in. And so, I mean, was there it sounds like you wanted, special education has been in your blood for a while, but was there anything in particular that, I guess, rung that bell for you? Like you said, this is really it. This is where I really see my purpose here and where I see I can be the most helpful.
Sure. I think for me, it was actually being in a field that was totally not for me that made me realize that I had so much passion in this other field and working with children in the field of special education and helping people versus the world of finance, which is great for some people. They're passionate
Sure.
about it. But I think it was having that experience of realizing that just wasn't for me that made me pivot back to what I knew I felt so passionate about and was personally so rewarding for me.
Sometimes we need to go out there and find the things that aren't working for us, even if they work really well for other people, to realize what it is that we're really actually pretty passionate about. And sometimes we just need to journey away from home to realize where home is.
Absolutely. And I really believe every part of people's journeys has a purpose. Even though I don't do finance anymore, it served such an important purpose in my life.
So I think you also did, if I remember correctly, a research study on alternatives for teaching reading comprehension. Is that right?
I did. That was actually back when I was in high school. That was really the beginning of my passion about research and about learning about effective methods for helping children. And that research study involved identifying an optimal strategy for teaching reading comprehension to students who have language-based learning disabilities. And that involved visualization. So it involved teaching students how to create visual images of information that they read or that they hear in order to help them better process that information and to improve their reading comprehension skills.
Yes, I think I may have just done that right before we hopped on our recording. I was going over how to pronounce your name, your last name, Dr. Levy, and I had to put a leaf in my head to remember that. So these things, even really simple tricks like that, can be really helpful. And I'm sure what you did was far more sophisticated than that. But it can just little things can be so helpful and integral for people to learn better, whether and finding out what it is that if they have a language or reading comprehension difficulties, or if it's numbers or something else, right?
Exactly. And some people are able to kind of figure out those tips and tricks on their own. And others really benefit from being taught those strategies and tips to help them improve their skills. And there's so much out there now that really didn't exist before. So being taught those strategies can really change someone's lives for the better.
Right. Absolutely. I know for me growing up as somebody with ADHD, and it just was really poorly understood in the 70s and the early 80s when I was in school. And I think what happened was I learned some tips and tricks on my own, but I also just learned to, and this we can talk a little bit more about, is mask my deficiencies, right? So I could rely on my strengths. I found out what those were, rely really heavily on them, and just mask any deficiency and mask who I really was. And I'm sure you've seen that in all sorts of different types of learning differences.
Absolutely. And what I actually encourage children really and adults to do is identify those strengths and play up those strengths. If someone who has dyslexia really struggles with reading, but they're an amazing artist, they should take art classes. They should play up that strength because that'll make them feel good and feel confident. The challenge, though, is inevitably you're going to have to read and write as you progress through school. So it's important to continue to play up those strengths, which I think is so key for confidence, but at the same time, work on developing those weaker areas. And I always tell students, we all have strengths and weaknesses. We're not perfect. I might be good at certain things. I'm a terrible swimmer, and one of my daughters is a great swimmer. So I try to really look at it through that lens. We all have areas we need to work on, and we all have areas that we're stronger in.
And that's such a helpful perspective, especially for children growing up, because there's this expectation in school that you know how to do these things and that everybody should know how to do these things. So there might be something wrong with you if you don't know how to do these things as well as another kid, right?
Absolutely. And kids naturally compare themselves to one another. So I think without having an adult to help coach them through this or someone who's a third party, it could really be devastating for children. They feel their self-esteem is crushed. I mean, I see it all the time. They have anxiety, depression, low self-esteem because they just see themselves as failures, even when that's completely not the case.
Right. Yeah. And I wonder, what are some of the common misconceptions about kids who have learning differences, whether that's from parents or teachers or other kids?
Well, I think one of the traditional misconceptions is that they're not smart, that they're, traditionally kids used to say, that they're dumb, they're not smart. But the reality is it has nothing to do with IQ. Some kids who are adults who have dyslexia, who have dyscalculia, who have ADHD, have very high IQ. So it's really not about their intellectual capacity. It's about being taught differently, being taught different strategies that work for their brain. Whereas for some students, or like I alluded to before, they're able to pick up on these strategies on their own and these skills on their own. And others just need them to be taught to them differently. So I think it's about identifying the right strategies and the right person who can teach them the strategies that work best for them.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder what part of the world people might be listening to from here today, but in my part of the world on the West Coast, we're just starting the school year, and other parts have been in the school year now for a couple of weeks, and some will start later. But it's kind of helpful to think about for parents or maybe educators who sort of suspect that their child or their student might be having some challenges. What types of things can you do to help support them or help to identify that particular challenge, that it is something that they need extra support for?
Sure. Well, the first thing I always say is that once a parent knows who their child's teacher is going to be, I think it's really important to proactively set up a meeting, whether it's in person or on the phone, just to tell their child's teacher about their child, about any challenges they have, about what works for them, what kind of seating might be best. So just to jumpstart the school year with that knowledge instead of waiting for the teacher to figure it out several months down the road. Really jumpstarting with a meeting like that, having an open door to communication, setting up a plan for communicating regularly with the teacher, I think is key. And then, of course, if a child is really struggling at some point, it probably makes sense to have a full evaluation done to see what kind of services a school may be able to offer. But I would say day one, set up that meeting with the teacher and start the school year off that way.
So you're talking about even if you don't have a formal diagnosis, you haven't had a formal evaluation for your child yet, but you recognize that there's something, whether it's emotional or there's just some challenge to some aspect of their learning that the teacher would benefit from knowing. So they're not guessing and maybe treating your child differently than is most supportive for them.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then in terms of getting evaluation, like what if you get to that point? What do people do in terms of an evaluation?
Sure, there's two options. So every family is entitled to a free evaluation through their local public school. A parent can request it. Oftentimes, a teacher might recommend it as well, but the parent is entitled to request their own free evaluation. And then based on that evaluation, typically either a 504 plan or an IEP is created, which details what their diagnosis is and which services they should be receiving. And then the school has an obligation to provide those services to the student.
Right. And IEP is independent educational plan. Am I right? Did I get there?
Got
okay,
it.
good.
Good.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of parents might be nervous about that. Like they don't want their kids. I've heard this from parents. Oh, I don't want my kid to be labeled a certain way. Like I feel like that will somehow harm them through their educational career. What do you have to say to those parents?
Well, the reality is that when a child receives the right services that are appropriate for their learning needs, it can be life-changing. So if as a parent you choose not to do an evaluation simply because of the stigma you think it might create, you're really doing a disservice to your child because there's a pretty good chance that they're just going to struggle throughout school. They'll have poor grades, poor self-esteem, anxiety, depression. So if you kind of weigh those two, the risk of maybe having some kind of stigma, which is unlikely this day and age, versus really giving your child the right support, in my mind, it's a no-brainer. You want your child to have that support to help them thrive.
I guess I was also thinking about some parents who might have children who actually do okay grades-wise, but that doesn't mean that they're not struggling. As a parent, if your kid is working harder, a lot harder, and maybe having anxiety or some depression, or it's really challenging for them to do as well as they do, like why not give them that support so that they can feel better about what they're doing, so that they enjoy learning to some degree, right? It may not be for every subject, but it can be for many, right?
Definitely, without a doubt.
And what about when kids get later on in their educational career? So, you move into high school, you no longer have the single teacher, right? You could have anywhere from 6 to 8 different teachers. And how do parents and kids who have learning differences, how do they get that support from each teacher?
Sure. Well, that does become a challenge, particularly for students who have ADHD and struggle with organization, planning, time management. Now they actually have to move around and manage their whole life and their whole schedule. So that's actually when these we'll call executive functioning strategies are really helpful, really working on strategies for time management, for planning out their day, for creating systems and structure, really at the very beginning, if not before the school year starts. So that is key, especially when they start to transition through classes. But beyond that, it's really the same approach of setting up a team meeting, either with all teachers together or individually at the beginning of the school year. Explain your child's needs, what works for them, what doesn't, and set up that plan of communication now instead of just one teacher, really with each of the teachers, again, either as a team or individually.
Let's take a quick break.
Hey, everybody, this is Melissa with the Fully Mindful. It's the new year, and I bet you're feeling the need to unlock your full potential and embrace empowerment, or maybe something completely different. Well, I'm excited to offer a new program with one-on-one breathwork and coaching sessions. We'll embark on a truly transformative journey of self-discovery, combining conscious, connected breathwork and embodiment coaching, and more. So contact me, Melissa, at the Fully Mindful, for your transformative session today. Two things there that I wanted to follow up on. The systems and structures, I find, at least as someone who has ADHD, so critical. At least for me, that's where my executive functioning really falls apart, right? So somebody can show me or even set up a system or structure for me. I know I had resisted that, like, oh, I want to be spontaneous, my ADHD, I want to be spontaneous, I want to be creative, and I can still be that and have the system and the structure, right? Resist it?
It certainly doesn't take away from a personality or who the person is. It's just a matter of creating some structure in their life, which might be otherwise completely unstructured. And it's hard to thrive if that's the way that you think all the time in an environment that requires a lot of structure. So I think that if for students who are initially resistant, what they find is that as we implement these strategies, they start to see what an amazing difference it can make for them with a lot of effort. Sometimes it's about experiencing those strategies for them to see the difference.
Maybe just using it as a sort of experiment, like, well, what if we try this strategy? What if we try implementing this structure and see how that feels?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that can be really key. We live in a culture, an environment, which is heavily structured, right? It's heavily linear. And folks who have different learning styles may not think that way, which is actually the beauty, right, of learning differences. Is some people are able to see bigger pictures, see connections where other people don't see connections. And yet you still have to live in this predominantly linear, structured environment, right? So it's giving them the tools so that they can function even better, thrive within that very structured system.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to follow up on is independence. And so again, I'm thinking about kids who, I don't know, 5th, 6th grade on, maybe even younger. But, at some point, kids have to learn how to be a little bit more independent, right? And so how do you navigate, okay, I'm going to help you set up this system and these strategies, but eventually you're going to have to probably do that on your own or know how to do that on your own. So how do you balance that, like, especially as a parent, but also as a teacher, where as kids age, we're letting go a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more so that they can become more independent, so that when they do go to college or a trade school or get a job or whatever it is that they do after they're finished high school, that they know how to navigate the world.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in independence. I think it's such a critical life skill, clearly. And I think the key to managing that is obviously everyone's different, but to start with more oversight. So meaning a parent might show their child a strategy, check in with them 3 or 4 times a day to make sure they're implementing the strategy. How are they implementing it? And then maybe after a few weeks, instead of 3 or 4 times a day, it goes down to 2 or 3 times a day. And then eventually maybe once a day. And then the proof is in the pudding. So if the child is implementing them on their own, doing well in school, the parent can take a total back seat. if there comes a time where they start to struggle again, the parent might have to come back in and be a little bit more involved. So sometimes it's a little bit of give and take in that respect, but absolutely, I'm a big believer in parents really trying to take a step back when their child is ready and encourage them to be independent with the strategies.
And that's such a big deal, isn't it? Not just for kids who have learning differences, but just kids and parents in general. We have swung this pendulum in this other direction where, at least when I was growing up in the 70s and the 80s, and we probably had way too much independence, right? We just went out in the world and, we'll see you before, the TV would say, are your children home at whatever 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night? And that was when you were supposed to go looking for your children. That was maybe a little bit too much, but we've really swung the other way, right? Where you have a lot of, I don't know if they still call it this, but helicopter parenting, this parenting that's really hands-on. For instance, I read a Facebook post recently about, was this sweet, or I can't remember how they titled it, but was this a sweet action or, maybe something we need to be thinking about? It was a mother who spent the night with her child the first night in their dorm room, right? Mm-hmm. So we have this pendulum swinging the other way. So we could all benefit from that sage observation there. It's like, okay, we give a lot of support at first and then slowly ease off, right? We slowly ease off the brake. And then if we need to go back in there, we can a little bit, but that's our job, right? Like that's how our kids are going to become independent, successful people in the world.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, that's really what we all want. I mean, you hear so many stories of kids that arrive in college and they don't know what to do with themselves. They don't know how to do laundry or how to make their bed or how to get to class because their parents did everything for them. So, and then there's the mental health issues, get a job, they don't know how to shake someone's hand. There's so many issues that come into play when they don't learn these skills when they're younger. And all of a sudden they're just thrust into the world without them.
Right. At least in terms of kids who have learning differences, right? And you can give them the supports. You are automatically teaching this skill right here, how to do this on their own eventually, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So important.
That's great. So I guess, okay, so how did the idea of EBL coaching come to you? Obviously, you had this kind of career trajectory. What was it that made you decide, I'm going to do this thing?
It was a very organic process. I was in my second year of finance, realized it wasn't for me. And actually, in midway through that second year, I started to call different schools in Manhattan. And I happened to have had this training in working with students with learning challenges. And I reached out to all the learning specialists at these schools. And I told them I was a tutor and I was trained in these methods and would love to work with their students, and didn't get calls for a while. And then all of a sudden, the calls started rushing in. So I got to a point where I was doing finance during the day from 8:30 to 5 or whatever it was. And then all evening and all weekend, I was running around Manhattan working with kids. And I loved it, but it became too much.
Yeah.
So I took a leap of faith and I decided to leave my finance job. And then I started working with kids at schools during the day, and it quickly maxed out my time. That was when I just slowly and organically brought in other experts who specialized in all different skill areas, and just slowly and organically began to grow it that way.
Yeah, that's great. And I love that story because it highlights that it's not something that happens overnight, right? It took a while for you to get some calls back, and then you sort of had to straddle two careers there for a bit in order to make it work, I'm sure financially, as well as to just see if this was a viable thing that was going to work for you. And then there's that leap of faith at some point that we all have to take, whatever decision making that we're involved in, right? We have to take a leap of faith of like, okay, I'm going to see how this works. And it's been highly successful, and you've been able to help, I think, a tremendous number of people. Now, do you just work in New York, or do you do stuff all over the world?
It's a great question. And by the way, it was scary along the way. There were many where the unknown was very scary, and I made many mistakes along the way, and you pick up and learn and, so forth. But so no, we have offices in New York and New Jersey, and then we do virtual tutoring now with kids around the world. We have kids in Europe and Asia and all over the world. So it's really an amazing opportunity to help kids, not just in our local area, but really worldwide at this point, especially because many families live in areas where they don't have access to Orton Gillingham tutoring or an executive functioning coach or this kind of specialized tutoring to help their children who may have special education needs.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I guess the observer in me is wondering how kids from other cultures, how their learning differences are actually similar and how they might be different. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I mean, well, of course, certain languages are more challenging than others, but it definitely applies to all languages, all cultures. It's really about how the brain functions and it can process language and so forth. So it definitely it applies, like I said, through all cultures, all languages.
And do you notice that there's a difference for those who have difficulty with learning, let's say, the more humanities type of subjects like language or history, those sorts of things, versus people who have more difficulty with the mathematical or scientific based learning?
I think it really depends. There are some that really just struggle with language-based skills, others that just struggle with math, and some that struggle with all academic skills. So it's really about identifying the individual challenges and then coming up with a plan of action to target those challenges.
Right. So you're really coming up with a very individualized plan for each student that EBL coaching works with, right?
Very much so. Absolutely.
Right. And that can be really supportive, even for a kid who has an independent educational plan. How do you collaborate when, let's say, a kid has an IEP, his 504 plan, and there's something that's happening in their school? How do your coaches work and collaborate with the kids, the parents, the teachers who all have a hand in this?
Yeah, we find the more we can work as a team, the better. So that's with parents, with teachers. If there are other service providers like a speech therapist, we find the more we can collaborate and work together as a team, the better it is for the child.
So how do you go about doing that?
Again, that varies on a case-by-case basis. So sometimes it's monthly check-ins, sometimes it's regular meetings, sometimes it's speaking to the parent at the end of each session and showing them what they can work on in between sessions if the family is home and available to do that. So it's really a matter of assessing the situation for that student, for that family, and then coming up with the communication plan that's best for each one.
So what advice might you give to other educators who are really interested in making a difference in the lives of students with different educational needs, particularly those who might have ADHD or neurodivergent conditions?
Sure. Well, a few things. One is, like you alluded to, I think it's really important to individualize the instruction to their specific and unique needs. At EBL Coaching, we pull from about 22 different research-based techniques, depending on what's right for each student. So I think really taking that customized approach to working with each child is so key. And then just really advocating for them as much as possible to make sure that they're getting support not only outside of school, but within the school day as well.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So, I mean, is there like a bigger purpose to this work? I mean, obviously you're daily helping kids learn and become better at learning and handling school and handling their emotions around that. And you're helping parents as well. But is there some sort of bigger purpose that you see to this work?
Well, I think, like you said, it's so rewarding. There's so many kids that need this kind of support. I think ultimately, as teachers see how and schools see how much this kind of individualized multisensory instruction can really do for these children in a positive way, my hope is that maybe there will be more professional development for teachers where they can learn these different strategies and how they can help kids within the whole classroom. So not just kids who are pulled out or receive this extra support, but there are so many kids who could benefit from it within the classroom if the teachers were to receive the right practical training along the way.
And do you see a lot of differences throughout this country as well as other countries where teachers are, some of them are less supported, some are more supported in terms of learning how to work with kids with different learning abilities?
I think a lot of it depends on the geographic area, the district, the type of school. So yes, there is definitely variability. Hopefully it'll all continue to move in the right direction though.
Well, speaking of which, where do you see educating different learning abilities going in the next maybe 5 or 10 years? Where do you see this field going?
Well, again, I'm hopeful that teachers will receive not just training from their undergraduate or master's degree that's often more theoretical by nature, but really more practical, hands-on training on strategies for how to help different types of learners that they can apply it in the classroom. I'm hopeful that it will become more practical and less theoretical so that more and more can be helped.
Yeah. And are you thinking of expanding even more than you already have? I mean, it sounds like you're fairly international, but what's next?
Yeah, I'm always thinking about expanding. Like I said, we've really expanded our virtual tutoring, which has been amazing. We're constantly developing new resources, technology, workbooks, materials that can be used physically and electronically, and then continuing to expand geographically as well.
And does your work also go into social emotional learning for kids, or are you more focused on the educational piece, the learning piece?
We don't specifically do therapy work or social emotional work. However, it's often tied together with academic work, meaning we find that as we build students' academic skills, in turn, we see them feel more self-confident, reduce anxiety, reduce depression. So we find that they often do go hand in hand.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, like, what kind of techniques you might incorporate. I mean, obviously, like you said, it's going to be an individualized plan for each student, but what sorts of things could someone expect if they're working with you or one of the coaches there?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it does vary a lot, but we are big believers in positive reinforcement. So since kids, many of them are so used to negativity throughout school and often poor grades and like I said, a negative approach. So we really try to take that positive spin on whatever it is. If they struggle with writing, for instance, and when we start with them, they're only able to write maybe one sentence, but 3 months later, they're writing full paragraphs. We like to take out that work and say, look at what you were doing on day one and look at what you're doing now. You should feel so proud and so accomplished with the growth that you've made. So it's not these just empty compliments, but actual, real, concrete compliments that reflect the progress that we're seeing. And that really affects self-esteem in such a positive way.
Right. The kids learn how to internalize that as well, right? So you're teaching them how another skill, which is to look back and evaluate and self-evaluate with actual proof.
Absolutely. Makes
Yeah.
a difference.
You've mentioned a couple of times multi-sensory techniques. What are those?
Sure. So what that means is rather than, say, listening to a teacher or working out of a workbook, we integrate the visual, auditory, tactile, kinesthetic modalities simultaneously when teaching. So things like multicolored highlighters when teaching students how to identify different elements of text for reading comprehension. When we teach phonics, we use tools like audiovisual flashcards, magnetic tiles, whiteboards, colored sand for forming letters. So really integrating these types of tools within the context of a structured approach to learning.
Yeah, I like that. I can't help but look back at my own education and wish that I had done that or had that available. I want to applaud those of us with different learning abilities, but it's still helpful to be, as you mentioned, within the structure that we're living in, right? Like, go ahead and be creative.
Yes.
So it's about that collaboration between the student, the teacher, and whatever supports they might have.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wonder if you use a lot of what we talk about on this podcast, and if you introduce any sort of mindfulness techniques or anything that can help the student become more aware of their own thinking, how they think, and how they want to think, or how they can incorporate a new strategy or technique.
Well, I will say we do really try to encourage students to be in the moment, to focus on what we're doing, whether it's focusing on a math assignment or writing assignment, or even sitting in class and listening to a lecture. There's so many distractions these days between phones and notifications and everything that goes on that we really try to have students focus and be mindful on the work that they're doing in that moment.
Right, right. That's good. Yes, there are so many distractions. I think I read that, I can't remember exactly what the statistic was, but it was appalling about not just students and school-age children, but adults too, about how much time we spend on our phones. And of course, our phones are designed to be, or at least the applications on the phones are designed to be addictive and rewarding. So how, other than what you've already mentioned, the beautiful example of calling attention to a kid's or a particular student's growth and showing them how they've grown, How do you help students to be less distracted by the everyday distractions, whether that's their phone or friends or whatever might be the
I mean,
distractions they're learning?
it can be tricky because there are
Mm.
so many distractions, but there are many tools that we try to integrate. For example, there's a strategy that we use for some students where we come up with a period of time that works for them. But it might be, for instance, we're going to work for 20 minutes and then
Mhm.
we're going to take a 5-minute break. And you could do whatever you want during that 5-minute break. And then we're going to work for 20 minutes again, then 5 minutes. And we might do that cycle 3 or 4 times. And then they get a longer break of, say, 20. So they're not completely giving up on their phones and whatever else they need to do. But for those 20 minutes, they're just going to focus on what we're doing until it's time for them to take a break. So it's kind of, again, building structure into that world of distractions when so many other things are going on.
Yeah, and I know schools are really trying to deal with that. You see across the country, I've seen several articles and know that my daughter's school, for instance, is implementing a no phones during the school policy. Lots of schools have different ways of doing that, whether that's you can't bring it to school or you have to put it in your backpack or your locker or you just simply put it in a cubby or something like that. What do you think of that
I-
strategy?
It's massively important. I think
Mhm.
that it's fine if kids need to bring their phone to school and keep it in their locker or in a pouch somewhere because their parents need to make sure they get to school or whatever it is. Same thing with after school. But I don't see any reason why kids need their phones during the school day. It's only a distraction and parents know where their child is. So I think it's a huge disservice allowing kids to have their phones during the school day to use and have access to.
I mean, we all managed to get through school without a phone. And it is funny because I went to an event the other night where, it was a ticketed event and they have you put your phones in a locked something. You get to keep your phone, but it's in this locked pouch. I don't have to worry about who's contacting me. I don't have to worry about if I get the right picture or the right video of this event. I can just be present for this event. And that's what I think you're advocating for is let's be present. And if we have to take that in little bits, for instance, when you're coaching or tutoring someone, let's do this for 20 minutes, then do a 5-minute break. And teachers can implement the same sort of strategy, right, with their students. They don't have to just power through the hour or hour and a half that they have with the students. They can do different things to mix it up so that it's not just teacher droning on, like the Charlie Brown parent on the phone, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to be engaging. You have to work for it. Attention is so difficult to achieve personally, but also to invite attention is really challenging, right? And people have 99,000 other things that are going on in their lives. And so it really is a big challenge to get people to have full attention. And taking away phones is probably one tool in the tool belt, right?
Exactly.
And if you keep it engaging, likely the students aren't going to notice that their phone was gone.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Well, are there any other resources that you can offer up parents or educators or kids who might be listening to this?
I write articles all the time, blogs, articles on various topics, both for students and for parents and how they can help their kids. And that's on our website, eblcoaching.com. We also have an Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook handle, all under EBL Coaching. And I really try to provide as much information, as many resources as possible for parents and students to utilize.
In fact, they not only can access these free resources, but should they want to connect with EBL Coaching to get some assistance and support, they can do that through your website as well. Is that right?
Yes, they can.
Is there anything that we didn't talk about today that you were hoping to talk about?
No, I think it was a great conversation. We covered a lot of interesting material, and I can't think of anything else that we didn't cover.
Yeah. Well, I'm wishing everyone starting the school year the best of luck, the best of support for all of you, for parents, for students, for teachers, educators, paraeducators, everybody, because it's going to be an exciting new year. And it's such a great time to start fresh, start anew, and get the support we all need.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. I know you have a very busy schedule and really appreciate you doing that today.
It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed it. And thank you for having me.
Hey, everybody, it's Melissa, and I'm wondering if you all can relate. Have you ever caught yourself procrastinating or maybe doubting your abilities, or maybe you have a black belt inner critic like I do or have had that wants to sabotage your every move with judgment and perfectionism expectations? It might keep you stuck, it might keep you anxious and away from your full potential. The Positive Intelligence Program, PQ, is a powerful 6-week journey designed to help you quiet those saboteurs, embrace positivity, and find flow in your life. Through daily practices and weekly focuses, we'll work together to build your mental fitness. The PQ app will guide you every step of the way and support you, and you'll be supported either by myself in a one-on-one or in a small group of like-minded individuals where you can share insights and progress. So reach out, contact me at info@thefullymindful.com to find out how we can work together one-on-one or in a small group today.